Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. 9 days away from Christmas. There's still some time for shopping, cooking, whipping up some eggnog, and oh yes, listening to this latest episode of what the sports landscape has to offer, as this is the J Reels Podcast with Joe's J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now, as we get even closer, deep into the home stretch of the NFL season, and yesterday, what we will uncover is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and everything in between. But the thing is that there's not much going on in one conference, but there's a lot going on in the other. And I'm going to break down both of them. We'll go through all the scenarios as now we head into the final 3 weeks. I understand we have 2 games tonight. I hate the Monday night doubleheaders, as you know, where the first game, Chicago, Minnesota, which is a big game, and I'll get into that when we talk about the NFC, and the second game, which is just a half hour after the start of Bears and Vikings, is in the desert between the Falcons and Raiders. And yes, the Falcons do play a part in this, although they're fading fast, and with the Buccaneers surging, you wonder if the Falcons will be able to soar yet again, similar to how they performed in the beginning of the year, or at least in the first half, when they got off to a 6-3 record, and since then have not won a game. But I'll start with the AFC as we take this big picture, because the AFC, as it is currently constituted, it is a wrap. It is done. It is a formality. All you need to do is just wonder where the teams are going to be seated as you get into the middle of January, because besides that, there's nothing else to discuss. Whereas in the NFC, it has now become one that could have a lot of drama, certainly a lot of intrigue and a lot of interest, based on the 2 losses yesterday by the Lions and the Seahawks. But I want to start off with the AFC just to kind of get it over with, because there isn't really much to discuss. And yes, we could talk about games and breakdowns, and I will get into a little bit of that. But let's go from 1 through 7, because anything outside of that, you can forget about it. So if you're Miami, who lost in Houston yesterday, and they can't win a road game to save their lives, so they are kaput. Cincinnati, although they won in Tennessee, and a lot of people may think that they could also now have a run in them, considering that they do have a team that's ahead of them in the standings, albeit 3 games ahead of them. But you have to take a look to see whether or not that even if they do happen to get to the playoffs, they're going to need a wing and a prayer big time, because they do not have tiebreakers against the Chargers, as they lost to them early in the year. So they're really going to need a ton of help. So you can pretty much forget about them. And then the Colts yesterday, and I'll start there, because that was the one game that if there was going to be anything that could come out of the AFC as far as the bottom part of the conference goes, it was that game. And for the Colts to go in there, and they got an early turnover, despite the fact that they did get a touchdown, the turnover that they got there from Bo Nix, who threw 3 interceptions in the game, they only were able to convert that to a field goal. And then they did have a 13-7 lead early in the third quarter, and this is where the game changed on a dime. Granted that you had a lot of mistakes with Anthony Richardson, and I'll get to him in a second, but for Jonathan Taylor, who is a seasoned running back and one of the top running backs in the sport, and you can even argue that he's underrated, considering that when people think about running backs in the NFL, they're going to think about Saquon Barkley as well as Derrick Henry. And for Jonathan Taylor, who in his own right does not have to take a backseat to anybody, but here he was. He goes right up the gut, off to the right sideline, and as he gets into the end zone, or right before he gets into the end zone, for whatever the reason, he just happens to drop the ball, as if he had crossed the goal line and had scored, which would have put the Colts up by 2 scores. Technically, it could have been 20-7 with an extra point. Who knows if they would have gone for 2 with the metrics and analytics and things of that nature. Who knows, maybe the head coach Shane Steichen would have chosen to go for 2 there just so they could have a 2-touchdown lead. But that was for naught, because Taylor, for whatever the reason, just decided to drop the ball at the 1-inch line. It did go out of bounds, so therefore the ball went to Denver. And at that point, that's when the Broncos took over. 24-0 unanswered points from that point on, as the Broncos go on and win 31-13, which puts to rest the Colts. And just an inexplicable final couple of quarters there, as the Colts looked like they were playing pretty steady, Granted that the Broncos had made a ton of errors there, as I mentioned about Bo Nix. And then as the Colts tried to rally around, they were down 17-13. And when the crazy play that just blew up in front of them, where Adonai Mitchell on a reverse was trying to get it back to Anthony Richardson, and it was picked off and taken to the house, and that was pretty much a ball game. And Anthony Richardson, I'm sure the Colt fan has to be wondering right now, you have a guy that has a world of talent, has the NFL body, prototype quarterback that you want, size, arm strength, has running ability, but for whatever reason, he has not been able to put it together. He's a guy that is inaccurate, has that fastball arm, is more of a thrower than a passer, and who knows what's going to happen here with Richardson. Of course, he's going to get another shot next year as he's been relatively healthy in the second half of the year, but the Colts have to scratch their heads wondering whether or not if this is going to be the guy that's going to carry this franchise for the next decade plus. That's my opinion. That's not to say he doesn't have ability. That doesn't say that he's not capable of playing in the league. But you do have to wonder whether or not he's going to have some touch on those throws, that he could develop some accuracy, that he's going to be able to read defenses, as we know, because the numbers have been paltry. And yes, we know about his running ability and his being able to play in open space. But obviously the position is a lot more than that. And if you're a Colts fan, I would certainly question whether or not he's going to be a guy for the future. So that's what you have with the Broncos, as they pretty much solidified their spot in the postseason. And even with the Chargers losing to Tampa yesterday, and I know that's more of an NFC focal point when it comes to the Bucs, but the Chargers at home, and this is a team that's trying to get out of their own way, trying to uplift a lot of the stench from previous regimes, whether it's Anthony Lynn, whether it's recently Brandon Staley, even if you want to go back to the days of Marty Schottenheimer when they were 14-2 and they weren't able to get out of a division round. For the Chargers, who are trying to make a name with their defense and their offense, I understand even with the quarterback, still doesn't have a plethora of options to throw to, or even from the running back position. Granted that J.K. Dobbins has had his moments this year, Gus Edwards the same. But for them to put up an absolute stinker at this time of the year, where they lose 40-17, and for the Chargers now drop themselves down to the 7th seed in the AFC, only because they're now 8-6, a game behind both the both behind the Broncos and the Ravens. And as we know, the Ravens have the tiebreaker on the Broncos now. That's why they're the 5 seed. And remember, they also beat the Chargers as well. So any tiebreaker, if the records are the same by the end of the year, the Ravens will have the advantage as far as seeding goes. Now, there is going to be a big game on Saturday due to the fact of what happened in Philadelphia yesterday, which I'll get to, but I'm going to start at the top now as I go from the bottom rung of the conference to the top. Kansas City and Cleveland yesterday. All right, another ho-hum 21-7 victory. Nothing really to write home about. But the big story is Patrick Mahomes had his ankle rolled up there midway through the fourth quarter, with the game being on Saturday, as you'll have a doubleheader there with the Texans playing the Chiefs, and of course Ravens Steelers then, and those two teams, or really those 4 teams, will have the quick turnaround and play on Christmas, as we know. But for the Chiefs, the big worry is whether or not Mahomes is going to be healthy enough to play Saturday at home against the Texans. And if I'm Andy Reid, if I'm the Chiefs, if his ankle's not 100%, I wouldn't play him. They have a 2-game lead in the conference, really a game and a half when you think about it, because if they do end up tied with the Buffalo Bills, remember the Bills have the tiebreaker on them beating the Chiefs up in Orchard Park earlier this year. So they do have a little bit of wiggle room. Now, if it's too soon for him to come back, it's not as if with the 6-day time frame between yesterday and Saturday's game against the Texans, it's not as if they're going to play the following Sunday. They're going to play that Wednesday. So who knows? We know Patrick Mahomes is a guy that's going to gut it out. He is a warrior. We saw him a couple of years ago when he had that bum ankle and how he performed in the Super Bowl against the Eagles. So this is a guy that you certainly cannot count out. But if his ankle, whether it's a high ankle sprain or who knows if there's some cartilage or maybe some tendons there that were stretched, we don't know the extent of the injury as of right this moment. But if it's a situation where he's going to be hobbled or taped up or has to get injected, which I wouldn't be surprised if Mahomes is going to do, considering that the 1 seed right now is going to be vital. Knowing that they don't have a tiebreaker, although a 2-game lead in the conference, don't forget that. But you wonder whether or not they're going to give him this coming game off and maybe play in Pittsburgh and then play the final game where they're going to have to go to Denver to play the Broncos. So that is going to be the big question mark and one of the more highly visible ankles that you're going to see here in sports over the course of the next week and change. So let's see what's going to happen there with the Chiefs as they are 13-1 with the best record in the National Football League. Then you have the Buffalo Bills, who were in Detroit yesterday, and they were in control throughout. Now, I understand the final score is going to indicate maybe a shootout of a close game, but that wasn't the case. They were up 35-14 at one point, and yes, the Lions chipped away, and you could pretty much talk about the Bill defense, how they pretty much played in prevent and let the Lions go up and down the field. But it almost came down to an onside kick that even with 12 seconds left and 2 timeouts, that the Lions actually had an opportunity. But for the onside kick, which hit the Bills player there at the 10-yard mark, and there was a scrum to say the least, but the Bills were able to recover, and a couple of knees, or really one knee, and that was the game. But to me, that was a game that a lot of people looked at as a possible Super Bowl preview, as well as the other game, which I'll get to, the 3 seed in the AFC and the Steelers. But that was a no contest. That showed you right there whether or not the Buffalo Bills belonged as one of the upper echelon teams in the sport. Now, as Tony Romo said, was this a statement game for the Bills? Let's not get crazy. I understand the Lions are a very good team, and they had also won, 10 games in a row before losing yesterday. But the Bills, obviously with Josh Allen, who's going to be the MVP of the league, I don't care what you say, forget about Saquon Barkley, and you even want to throw Lamar back into the mix after his 5-touchdown performance yesterday where he was 22 or 24. Please, it was against the Giants. I could probably throw 5 touchdowns against them if I was in the lineup. But for Allen, they have made a case, or he has made a case to be the MVP, and the Bills, not a statement game. And yes, we could talk about how they dismantled the Lions, but remember this, the Lions had 13 guys on the defensive side of the ball on IR, and they're going to have 3 more guys that could be done for the year, unfortunately, which is a bigger question, which I'll get to on the NFC side when we talk about the Lions. But for the Bills, that was a good win for them. Gives them a game advantage over Pittsburgh, even though I thought that they were going to have the inside track to get the 2 seed based on the tiebreakers with Pittsburgh if they do end up with the same record. And even though the Steelers lost the game yesterday, it doesn't hurt them in the conference because they did lose to Philly. But 1 second back to the Bills. Again, that was a good win for them. I don't think it's a statement win. And if people are going to all of a sudden think that Buffalo is going to be a team that, I think they're going to be the favorites to come out of the AFC, considering what's happened with Kansas City recently. Obviously, them not being as crisp, and now with the injury to Mahomes, on top of the Steelers now taking a step back. Maybe the Ravens, if they have it in them to go on a run, that could be the wild card here in the AFC. But right now, to me, I'm not sold on Buffalo being that team that automatically right now you're going to champion them to be the representative for the AFC in the Super Bowl. I'm not. Because that defense in back-to-back weeks, granted, yesterday I get it, they had a big lead and they let the Lions come back, but they also gave up 44 points to the Rams the week before out in LA. So this Bill defense, I'm not going to be sold on. Yes, it's Josh Allen. Yes, he's probably going to be your MVP. Yes, he is Superman. But that defense is going to have to make some stops or 2 along the way, especially when you get to the crux of a playoff, whether it's in the divisional round or even in an AFC Championship game. So I am not going to be one here to say, watch out for the Bills here because I think they're going to be destined to go to the Super Bowl. Not this guy. We've seen it in years past. We thought that maybe a couple of years ago when Cincinnati went into their building, considering the whole DeMar Hamlin issue, where chances are the Bengals should have had a 2 seed and instead the Bills did. And what happened? The Bills laid an egg against the Bengals there as they were not even in the game. So I'm not going to be quick to point the Bills out for a fast track to a Super Bowl here on December the 16th. So I'm just going to put that out there. Now, as far as the Steelers go, that was an absolute putrid performance in Philadelphia. And I know during the broadcast, the Steelers hadn't won since 1965. I remember watching a Steeler game in Philadelphia in 2008 when they lost 15-3 and Roethlisberger got just run over big time. And even then, I remember on the broadcast how the Steelers had not won in Philadelphia in forever, which means they were 0 for Philadelphia. But I guess 65 was when the last time that they won, and this is, of course, prior to Veterans Stadium and here in the link, and yesterday was no different. They had opportunities there after a fumble recovery and by TJ Watt, and then off of a punt where they had a chance at the 11-yard line, and they were only able to convert it to 3. The Eagles go down, touchdown, make it 10-3, and even though the Steelers tried to be respectable in a sense where they were down 17-3 and they weren't able to muster anything on offense, other than 2 drives in the game, they did nothing. They were pathetic. They were just downright awful. And this was a game plan that you thought, especially from the defensive side, that if you were Mike Tomlin, you would have looked at it and said, I think these guys are going to come out firing with the pass. Because as we talked about on Thursday with the rift between A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts and how the Eagles, they haven't been able to do anything in the passing game 3 weeks prior. And you just knew that there was going to be a part of them that's going to want to show and prove, especially against that Steelers defense, to come out throwing, and they did. Jalen Hurts with 290 yards, 100 yards plus each for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith with a touchdown to complement. And again, the Steelers, even at 20-13, when they were in Eagle territory, looking like they were maybe having an opportunity to get into the end zone, turned the whole game around. The pitch to Najee Harris, who had his eyes up, went off of his chest, fumbled the ball, recovered by the Eagles, and then they went right down the field to punch it into the end zone 27-13, and that was your game. And then what happened there in the fourth quarter when they had 10:29 to go, and this is where you knew the Steelers were dominated. You figured that if the Steelers were able to get a stop there, and remember, that was deep in their territory, where the Eagles had the ball, I think it was at the 3-yard line. Now, on a 3rd and 6, so I think it was 3rd and 7, they converted there with A.J. Brown on a slant. And for the final 10:29 of the game, they ran out the clock. 40 minutes of time possession for the Eagles. They converted on, 10 of 16 third downs. I mean, they just killed the Steelers throughout the afternoon defensively. And then on top of that, to make matters worse, T.J. Watt had to leave with an ankle injury. Who knows what's going to happen with him? And on top of Dante Jackson, who had to leave with a lower back issue. And mind you, 6 days between now and that they have to go on the road again to Baltimore. Granted, it's not a cross-country trip, I understand. But now that game is going to be just of the highest priority for the Steelers to win, because if they win, the AFC North is theirs and they're going to be a lock as a 3 seed. But if they lose, totally different story. Then you have to worry about division and conferences as far as records go and common opponents, which right now doesn't look well for the Steelers, because remember, they not only lost to the Cowboys, where the Baltimore Ravens were able to beat the Cowboys, but they also have other tiebreakers that you have to think about. But again, we'll worry about that more on Thursday's podcast, but the Steelers were just downright awful in the game yesterday and just manhandled by the Eagles. And then you had the Texans, who, as I mentioned, they beat the Dolphins there yesterday, 9-5, kept them stable and clinched the playoff spot and actually the division based on the Colt loss there yesterday. And then the Ravens, they just plastered the Giants, as I mentioned, the 5 touchdown throws by Lamar. And that's your AFC playoff picture in a big nutshell. And we'll talk more about the AFC and the schedule when we get to Thursday's podcast. Now, the NFC is a totally different ball of wax. With the Lions losing yesterday, and the Lions, not to say they were due to lose, but certainly the Bills were able to just go up and down the field on them. And I get it that their defense is depleted, but their offense did show a lot of fight and were valiant in coming from behind, but falling short. But now this Lion loss has now opened up the aperture for the top of the NFC, because with the Eagles winning yesterday, and Saquon did not have a big game, by the way, even with their passing numbers being stellar against the Steelers. But Saquon, what did he have? 14 carries, 61 yards. On top of the Vikings who play tonight, and that is a big watch, only because if the Vikings win, they'll keep pace in the division, not even for the conference, against the Lions. And they do have a Week 18 matchup in Detroit, which is going to be enormous because, as you know, the Lions already have the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Vikings based on their win earlier this year in Minnesota. But still, if the Vikings were to win tonight, them, Eagles, Lions are all tied. But the Lions do have the advantage head-to-head against the Eagles as of right this moment, because they only have the one conference loss, where the Eagles have 2. And then, of course, the tiebreaker, as I mentioned, the Lions over Vikings in the division. But it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out, because with those 3 teams, they're going to be battling for the 1 seed. And with the schedules down the stretch, of course, that Week 18 game is going to be huge for the Vikings. Vikings still have to go to Seattle next week, which to me, the Seahawks are paper tigers, and I'll get to them in a minute. But those are your top 3 teams there. But the funny thing is that the Vikings aren't in the mix there, despite the fact that they could draw even with the Eagles and and Lions, because they are currently 5th in the conference based on the Rams ahead of them, as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Rams yesterday going back to Thursday's game, because they did have the Thursday night game where it set the NFL back 50 years, 12-6, bunch of field goals, and Matthew Stafford made enough plays to where they were playing from in front and didn't have to worry about the Niner offense. As we know, the Niner offense has been a mass unit all year, and Brock Purdy did not have a good game. I know the big story out of that game was Devondre Campbell, the linebacker, where you had a couple of linebackers having to leave the game, and where Campbell was going to be inserted into the game and decided, I'm going to pass. I'm sitting this one out. Where just a little while ago, word came down that he's been suspended for the final 3 games of the season. So instead of cutting him, releasing him altogether, and then giving him whatever money that was owed, they just suspended him, which they're going to see what they can recoup from the final $3 million, I guess that's owed, to Campbell. But his days, obviously, in San Francisco are over, and who knows, maybe the NFL altogether, considering his actions there on the sidelines on Thursday night. But what that means is now the Rams, with their win and with Seattle, which I'll get to in a second, but now the Rams, with the tiebreaker head-to-head beating Seattle earlier this year, they are currently have the NFC West lead. So therefore, where they are in the standings at this present moment, as I pull up the standings here, if you're watching on YouTube or even on Spotify for that matter, the Rams, although tied with Tampa, but Tampa has a better conference record, so therefore they have the tiebreaker ahead of the Rams, but now they are in the driver's seat and control their own destiny to win the NFC West, as the Seahawks foiled there last night. Just a rough go for Mike McDonald and his team, as Seattle was unable to answer Jordan Love and company. And then when you lose Geno Smith in the 3rd quarter with a knee injury, that pretty much put them out to pasture. Sam Howell, not the answer there as a fill-in, did not play well in Geno Smith's absence. So now you have to wonder about Geno Smith moving forward, as they have the Vikings playing in Seattle next weekend, which is going to be a huge game for them because they're going to have to keep pace with the Rams, although they do have a date, Week 18, to play in SoFi, which could be for the division and could be for that final spot, because right now Seattle at 8-6, they're on the outside looking in of the playoff picture, because the Commanders won yesterday in a weird game against the Saints, or a real weird finale, because the Saints actually had a shot to win the game based on the stoppage of the clock, where the referees, the officials, were unable to put the ball in play or get the ball set, where the clock stopped and the Saints had no timeouts. Therefore, they were able to get a touchdown. Just a weird sequence of events, but thankfully it worked out well for Washington, even though they did score a touchdown. But they were unable to convert the 2-point conversion, which if they did, there would have been controversy abound left and right about how the Commanders got jobbed of a game yesterday down in New Orleans. But that certainly, they can exhale and don't have to worry about that. So they currently are 7th in the NFC as of right this second. So Seattle, let's see what's going to happen with Geno Smith and his knee, which is going to be big for them to see whether or not they're going to try to get themselves back on the beam and get to that Week 18 game against the Rams for the division, because they do have the Vikings. Then they have to go to Chicago, which may not be easy because who knows what the weather will be like. And I get it that Chicago is certainly falling on hard times here over the second half of the season. But then you had Tampa, as I talked about before, with a big win in LA against the Chargers. What more can you say about what the Buccaneers have done? Remember, they were really technically 3 games behind in the division, behind Atlanta, and I guess it's more of an indictment on the Falcons and how they've fallen apart, but give it up for what Tampa has done now that they pretty much will control their own destiny from here on out, even if Atlanta does win tonight, because let's see, Atlanta right now is currently 6-7, so yeah, they're a game and a half behind them, and if they lose tonight, and the Raiders are due to win a game at some point, but we would think that Atlanta will get back in the win column and see if they could at least be within arm's length, or in this case, maybe a wing's length away, bad pun, I get it, from the Buccaneers. But that's what you have with the 4 seeds in the NFC. And then, of course, Minnesota 5, they're going to already make it to the postseason. They've already clinched the spot. Green Bay, big win there in Seattle yesterday. You got to give it up for what they've done here as they try to rebound from some bad losses. The 2 to the Lions, week 1 against the Eagles, as you know. And then they also lost to the other team in the conference, was Minnesota in the division, who they're going to face not this coming week, the week after next, as they have the Saints, then at Minnesota before wrapping up the season against Chicago. So their schedule relatively easy. I know the Vikings are sandwiched in between and they have to go to Minnesota. But that's the thing about Green Bay. All right, they could beat Seattle on the road, which Seattle, to me, isn't really, they're more of a pretender than a contender. But I need to see Green Bay beat a big team. And they haven't done that this year based on the 4 losses that they've had. But they're going to make the playoffs. They should be fine and probably should clinch after a win there next week. And then we talked about the rest of the conference, whether it's the Commanders followed by Seattle. I know Arizona won against New England yesterday, and they're still in play for a division. Now, mind you, they are in a situation where they have no tiebreaker advantage against the Seahawks. So the Seahawks will have to collapse here, and it could possibly happen with the injury to Geno Smith and with the Vikings and then the Bears, 2 games that certainly aren't automatics for the Seahawks. So if the Cardinals could get on a roll here, maybe if they get to week 18 where they'll play the Niners at home in the final game, and the Niners are done. I didn't even mention them when they played the Rams there. Niners are kaput. Niners are finished. There's no way. They're 1-4 in the division. So they have practically 0 tiebreakers against anybody. And forget about them getting a wild card. So to me, they are toast at 6-8. But the Cardinals, I don't trust them. But they do have an outside shot based on this injury to Geno Smith. And they do have a tiebreaker against the Rams, where they do play the Rams, I believe, the next to last game of the season, which is in LA, and that is a fact. So on the 29th, the penultimate game for the Cardinals will be at SoFi, which, let's say, hey, and I believe they have the Panthers coming up next, if I'm not mistaken. So if they handle business against the Panthers, which nope, that's the Seahawks, wrong team. If the Cardinals are able to beat Carolina and then beat the Rams with Seattle, and we got to see what is going to happen with them because they have to factor in, yes, they do go to Carolina, so they have to make the cross-country trip. It's not going to be easy. And then at the Rams, if they can win those 2 games, they could set themselves up for a possible NFC West berth based on what Seattle does here over the next 2 weeks. Because if they do win the next 2, they'll have the tiebreaker over the Rams and then beat the Niners on the final game. And then obviously if the Seahawks lose these next 2 games, they could be finished and the Cardinals could rise from the dead and win the NFC West. So just keep that in mind as we move it along here. And as far as the 7th seed in the NFC, I know it's going to be Washington. You could have a scenario where the Seahawks could get in. Now, the Seahawks have a terrible conference record. They're 4-5. So even if they draw even, then they're currently a game behind the Commanders. Commanders are currently 6-3 in the conference, so that would not bode well for Seattle. And even worse for the Cardinals, they can't even catch the Commanders. And even if they do and even out their record, currently their conference record is 3-6. So they certainly do not have a shot. And the Falcons, even though 6-3 in the conference, but they're 6-7 overall, and they are 2.5 games behind. And let's see what happens after tonight. They could be 2 games behind the Commanders when it's all said and done. But that is your AFC and NFC playoff picture. AFC is pretty much set. Just a matter of who's going to get seated where. And the NFC is right now a jumbled mess at the top with the Lions and Eagles. And let's see if the Vikings also put themselves in that picture there, although they're going to be at 5, even with the win there tonight. And then with the scenario regarding the NFC West, let's see what transpires there. And then the 7th seed, the Commanders, and then next few weeks, they host Philly this week, so not going to be an easy game. And then they close out their season, I believe, at Dallas. And who's the game in between? The Falcons at home. So not going to be an easy schedule for the Commanders, where they do have the next 2 games at home against Eagles and Falcons, who the Falcons are going to be playing for their lives, and the Eagles are going to try to keep pace with the Lions and then the Cowboys. So it's quite possible that the Commanders could fall apart here, so you're also going to have to keep that in the back of your mental Rolodex as we move it along here in this NFL season. And besides that, I think that's all I have here with the NFL. Yeah, nothing else to really get into, unpack, etc. Quickly with the college football, I know Army-Navy played there on Saturday, which was in essence the final college football game of the season. Now the bowl season will begin. Of course, the playoff begins this Friday. I'll preview it on Thursday's podcast, so no need to get into it then, or at least right now. But for Navy, they beat Army, and that was a big win for the midshipmen because Army, who's going to have a bowl game, they were 11-1, and generally Navy is the team that's usually the favorite coming into this game. But for the midshipmen, they were able to pretty much dominate from the start and took care of Army there down in Landover to the tune of a 31-13 victory. And your Heisman Trophy winner, no shock, the Colorado two-way player, Travis Hunter, who is your best player in college football. Actually, a very close vote, closest since 2009, where, who won that year? I got to go back and see. I know I typed that down somewhere. Mark Ingram, the running back from Alabama, who went on to the Saints, bounced around there, Ravens, etc. But there was the closest Heisman vote since then. And right behind him was Ashton, Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. And he even said that he should have won the award, but that means he's going to go harder, work harder for him. And yes, he was deserving to be in the discussion, but Hunter and his exploits there in Boulder certainly were going to be tough to overmatch. And that's where Hunter is your Heisman Trophy winner this year. All right, so now let me take off the helmet and shoulder pads and let me lace up the high tops to go through the NBA and the NBA Cup. Have I been watching? Have I been riveted by what has taken place here over the course of the weekend? Absolutely not. Sorry, guys. Just haven't. But, of course, I've been following from afar where you have two interesting teams there that are going to play for the Cup Final tomorrow in Vegas. You have the surging Milwaukee Bucks playing against the top-seeded team out west and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And the Bucks, we've talked about it, they started 2-8 and 4-9 in their season, and now they're currently 14-11. So they have certainly turned their fortunes around to the point where they've gone through the Eastern Conference, or at least through these groups here in the Cup tournament, and they beat the Hawks the other night, where the Hawks obviously have been playing very well. But Giannis has been on a mission, and you kind of wonder whether or not he's taking this on his shoulders as a little bit personal. But for the Bucks, right now flying high, and they're going to go up against a Thunder team, as we know, is going to be in contention. They were a 1 seed pretty much the whole year last year, although they lost in the conference semis to the Dallas Mavericks. But now they have not skipped a beat. They have not missed based on what they did last regular season. They're 20-5 to start their year. SGA is looking like an MVP candidate, as we know. And obviously the team's a little bit deeper, although they have some injuries there, Chet Holmgren, etc. But with Lou Dort and Jalen Williams and guys who are certainly complement one another and certainly buy into the whole team aspect with their coach Mike Daigneault. And how I look at this game, I look at it as a toss-up. I can see OKC winning this game based on what they've done throughout the course of the first 25 games of the year. And I can look at the Bucks with a little bit of their pedigree, more so from Giannis, maybe a little Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton, who's always in and out of the lineup. But Giannis, who knows? He may look at this as his personal battleground to win, however it's important to him to win this NBA Cup, to go along with his championship that he won 3 years ago. Not to say that that's going to mean much, but who knows? Maybe for him, he's going to take this personal and look at it from a standpoint of, we were 2-8 and 4-9, and now we've come all the way back to win this tournament. This means something to us. And now let's see how we play out the rest of this regular season as they try to move up the Eastern Conference and get themselves along the stratosphere with the Cavaliers and with the Celtics in the East. Now, they still have a long way to go to get there, but they're making their way up slowly but surely. There's still plenty of season to go. So you have to give the Bucks and Doc Rivers a lot of credit for how they played here. And yes, I mean, if I had to take a guess who's going to win this game, it's tough to bet against Giannis. But I wonder if the Thunder are a little bit more cohesive, a little bit more together. And maybe for them it means a little bit more only because this is a franchise leaving Seattle. They've only made it to one NBA final. And of course, that was a million years ago. But maybe they're looking at this regular season tournament to win this as a stepping stone for bigger and better things. So unlike last year where the Lakers won, and we know the Lakers are one of the flagship franchises in the sport, maybe now it's the Thunder's time for at least their city, their organization to have something under their belt as far as winning a tournament. Obviously, it's not the brass ring as we all know, but who knows? Maybe this could be a building block for them, just as it is for the Bucks, who have come pretty much all the way back from the dead to maybe win this thing, which would be important for their team psyche, their team overall moving forward. But I'm going to say that Thunder are going to win this game. No home court advantage because the game is in Vegas, as you know, but it's a scenario where I could see the Bucks winning this just as much as the Thunder. But I hate to say it this way, in the big picture, what does this all mean? It's an in-season tournament. But let's see. I'll probably tune in tomorrow night. I have to tune in. I have to see this just to see, take the temperature of how this game is going to go, unfold, etc. I know I got to deal with the courts, but one last game for this and then we can move on, as the NBA is looking forward to 9 days from now where they have their Christmas extravaganza, even though the NFL, like the big shark that they are, they're going to get ready to swallow it up. Although they only had the 2 games, the last couple of years they've had the 3 games, the 1, 4:30 and 8:15 game. They only had the 2 games this coming Christmas, 1 and 4:30. Obviously, Kansas City and Pittsburgh, and then Baltimore and Houston. So that's what you have with the NBA Cup. And then, of course, OKC did beat, along the way, I can't forget to say that, they did beat the Rockets. I know that the Bucks took care of the Hawks, but the Thunder got here by beating the Rockets, as you know. So now let's see what happens there tomorrow night. I believe the game is at 9 o'clock as I pull up my schedule here. I don't believe you have a game tonight in the NBA. I think it's going to be a dark night. I take that back. I had it backwards because, of course, while the screen was loading, Wednesday there are no games scheduled. So I saw that there, no game scheduled for Monday. But as the page loaded, I guess I got to get an upgrade on my internet. That may be the case. No games Wednesday, but you do have tomorrow night, Milwaukee, OKC, and that's on ABC. 8:30 is your tip-off, so we'll get to see who's going to be your in-season tournament winner tomorrow night. But as far as games tonight go, nothing really of note. Cavaliers are in Brooklyn tonight for those who are in the tri-state and want to go see an NBA game to see the East-leading Cavaliers. Denver at Sacramento. Sacramento's played a little bit better. I'll give it up to them, but they're still on the outside looking in when it comes to the top 10 in the Western Conference. Miami's played a little bit better. They're in Detroit tonight. And yeah, other than that, nothing else to really get into. Philly's in Charlotte, where the Sixer season just continues to spiral out of control. You had a scenario where Joel Embiid got hit in the face by Benedict Mathurin, I believe Friday night against the Pacers, had his sinus fracture to where who knows if he's going to have to wear the mask again as he wore a few years back when I believe he had a fractured orbital bone. So who knows if he's going to play in the game tonight. I think it's a game time situation. They'll probably sit him out. And then you also had Jared McCain, the number 1 pick out of Duke, had to get surgery on a torn meniscus. So he's going to be out for some time. And that's on top of Tyrese Maxey, who was out earlier this year, and Paul George, who's also been in and out of the lineup. Sixers are currently 7-16, and they cannot get out of their own way. So who knows what's going to happen with Embiid as he tries to make his way back into the lineup with the sinus fracture there that he suffered on Friday. But that is your NBA. Let me take a look at the standings if there's anything else I need to talk about. Yeah, I know you had a wild game in the Bay last night and a real crazy scheduling quirk where Dallas went back to the Bay Area. If you recall, at the start of the NBA in-season tournament, Dallas went to Golden State. That was Klay Thompson's return. He scored 22 points. They ended up losing the game, as you know. But they were back there last night, and Dallas actually won the game. And that was a game where there was a record combined 48 three-pointers made. And I believe 24 of them, I believe they were actually split down the middle, 24-24. But Klay Thompson, upon his return, 7 from 11 from 3, 29 points in the game as they won going away. I think it was 143-133. So kudos to the Mavericks, who have played very well here in the Western Conference. And Golden State still trying to find their way as they've been scuffling off of a great start. And they actually acquired some help getting Dennis Schrader from the Brooklyn Nets there over the weekend. And I believe there was some draft picks exchanged. And I believe a player did go from the Warriors to the Nets. Let me pull that up real quick. But Schrader, who's had a very good start to his season and certainly could provide some offense there and has actually shot well from three. On top of that, yes, they got DeAnthony Melton in the deal, but Melton had torn his ACL, so he's done for the year. So I don't know if Melton was an expiring contract. I would think that's going to be the case, as they had to exchange contracts there. And the Warriors will also get a second-round pick via the Heat next year, and the Nets will get 3 second-round picks on top of that through other teams. But for the scheduling quirk, Warriors are playing the Mavericks 3 times this year, where you would think the 2 games already were played in San Francisco by the Bay, and you would think the other 2 games would be in Dallas. Not the case. The other 2 games, one is in Dallas, and then the final matchup of the year is back in Golden State, to where they had 3 games. That is weird, because usually you'll have a situation where if you're going to play in the division, and of course the Warriors and Mavericks do not play in the same division, but you'll have an instance to where you'll play maybe 3 games against one team and then 4 against another. And the way it was set out by the schedule makers is the Mavericks and Warriors are going to play 4 games, where it's usually 2 games in each opposing team's building. Not the case. 3 games for the Mavericks to go to San Francisco and just 1 in Dallas? What happened there? Did they want to have a Klay Thompson return times 3? We've already seen it twice. We thought last night was the last time, and I looked again, and I saw that they were going to go back to San Francisco toward the end of the year. To me, it made no sense, but for whatever reason, I guess, I don't know. Schedule maker screwed up there, as Dallas does not get a game. Maybe they get that on the back end with another team where they'll play 3 out of 4 in their building against the team out west. Who knows? I didn't go deep in the weeds on that, people, but just from the surface, I saw that and I had to bring that up. And then LeBron played last night as they beat the Memphis Grizzlies. He was battling some foot soreness and had some time off from games where there was a big gap between games, and contributed yesterday. 18 points, didn't have a monster game by any stretch. But now LeBron back, as the Lakers are trying to find their way out west as well. So we'll see what's going to happen there. But the standings, as we take a quick look, Cavs, Celtics at the top there in the East, separated by 1 game. Then you have a 5-game drop-off between the Knicks, Orlando, behind both Boston and Cleveland. As I mentioned, Miami's played well. They've won 4 in a row. And Milwaukee now, those are the teams that are in the top 6. You have Atlanta, Indiana, Chicago, and Brooklyn, all separated by 3 games. And then Detroit just a half game behind the Nets for the final spot in the conference. And here I'm talking about final spots in the conference, and it's only 25 games into the season. But I guess just to bring it up now as we move it along. And then out west, we talked about OKC. They have a 4-loss but 3-game lead over Memphis. Then you have Rockets, Mavericks, tied with the same record at 17-9, just a half game behind Memphis, who's 18-9. A little bit of a drop-off. Denver and Phoenix round out your top 6. And then 7 through 10 is Minnesota, Golden State, Clippers, Lakers. And then on the outside of that, a game behind the Lakers for that 10 seed is Sacramento and San Antonio, both tied at 13-13. Lakers are 14-12. And then after that, a significant fall off where it's Portland, Utah, New Orleans, who are not going to be anywhere near the top 10 in the Western Conference. And so that's pretty much for your NBA. As far as, let me take a look at the schedules. I talked about tonight, and then of course you have the game Tuesday, no game scheduled Wednesday. So that's your NBA here in the early part of the week. As I take a quick sip, as far as what's happening on the ice as I lace up my skates, NHL, the Islanders. I know they're not a big story, but as an Islander fan, I do need to say this. They've tread water. They were without 2 of their best players here for over the last 6 weeks, and they got them back there yesterday in a loss to Chicago. Mathew Barzal, who had an upper body injury, missed 21 games in the process, so that's certainly welcome with open arms, on top of Adam Pelech, who also missed a ton of time there with an upper body injury as well, dating back to November. He got hit with a puck, in fact. That dated back November 1st, and with Barzal was October 30th. So to have those 2 key components back in the lineup, let's see if the Islanders will now start to generate a little bit of offense and also have one of their big defensemen back where they can stabilize that back line and maybe make a push here, because a lot of the teams in the Metropolitan Division, in their division, have come back to the pack. Rangers have been just putrid here. over these last few weeks, and we talked about the trade that was made, Jacob Trouba, and trying to have a little bit of a shakeup there. I don't know what's happening with Peter Laviolette. I don't know if the players have started to phase him out. Now, the Rangers got off to a good start this year, but they have not played well. And I'm sure if you're Chris Drury, the GM of the Rangers, I'm sure he's thinking long and hard. Granted that he just hired Laviolette last year, and we know that they had a big season last year with the President's Trophy, most points in the National Hockey League in a regular season. And yes, they did win a couple of rounds, got to a conference final before losing to Florida. But this is inexcusable if you're a Ranger fan. They have underachieved, not played well. I know Mika Zibanejad has underachieved this year. Artemi Panarin's had a big year. Kreider's had his moments, he's had his goals, but he was also on a trading block dating back to last year, which was a surprise. I get it, 33 years of age. I don't know what his contract status is. Maybe he still has a couple of years left. Maybe they're trying to get what they can or try to get what they can in the offseason. But right now, you pretty much have to keep him here because the Islanders, Penguins, Rangers all have 31 points. Mind you that the Rangers do have a couple games in hand. And then the Flyers are just 1 point ahead of all three of those teams, where the Blue Jackets are on last place at 29. So now with the Islanders trying to get a little bit whole here, and with those two big players back in their lineup, can they propel themselves to a little bit of a winning streak here, maybe some separation to get past the Flyers, Rangers, Penguins, and maybe creep up a little bit in the division where it's the Capitals, Devils, and Hurricanes at the top. And also with Colorado, the Avalanche, I bring them up only because talked about it on Thursday where they've traded for backup goalies, and they also traded for Mackenzie Blackwood from San Jose. He had his Avalanche debut the other day, I believe it was Saturday, where he had 37 saves. Nashville, who has been just abominable this year, and I picked them as an over with my point totals, as you know. But he gets his first win under his belt, and the Avalanche, who are treading water there in that Central Division among the likes of the Stars, as well as Utah, who has played pretty well here in their first year out there in Salt Lake. But the Jets and Wild are battling at the top there of the Central, 45 and 44 points respectively, who are 8 points ahead of the Stars in that division. But the rest of the league on a whole, Toronto has now propelled themselves to the top of the Atlantic Division, 2 points ahead of the Panthers. And the Bruins, who have played well under their new coach, Joe Sacco, but hanging in there, 3 points behind the Florida Panthers there in the division. And then out west, Vegas, who had that stretch where they played three big teams, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Minnesota, and they were 2-1 in those games, winning at Winnipeg before losing in Edmonton 6-3. And Edmonton's actually won 5 in a row, so they're on a bit of a roll. And then they did beat the Wild in Minnesota there yesterday. So give it up for the Golden Knights, who are continuing to play well. Now 4 points ahead of the LA Kings, who had a good trip here out east. They beat the Islanders there on Tuesday. I believe they did lose to the Devils there in the middle of that stretch, but then they beat the Rangers there and they just bloodied them. Not necessarily with fisticuffs, but they were up 5-0 before losing 5-1 in a matinee game in the Garden on Saturday. And tonight they are in Pittsburgh. As a matter of fact, they're in Pittsburgh tomorrow, so they had a couple of days to unwind after the trip here to the tri-state area. So they'll play Sidney Crosby and company there tomorrow night. And the Kings trying to hang in there with the Vegas Golden Knights. Other than that, people, that's your NHL here as we get closer to Christmas. And as the season, a lot of these teams have played 30 games. Now you're pretty much past the 1/3 point of your season. So we'll keep in mind. And let's take a look at the schedule here over the course of these coming days. Tonight, Washington at Dallas, a good game. A rematch. Glad I looked at the schedule. A rematch of your Stanley Cup Final, Florida at Edmonton tonight. And is it on ESPN? Is it on TNT? No, it's on NHL Network. NHL, you got to put that game on one of your big channels. I get it, NHL Network. If you have a cable package, I'm sure that you have it. But considering this is a rematch of a Cup Final, that's a game that ESPN should have just taken that. I know ESPN Plus has a lot of these games throughout the course of the year. And I guess whatever contractual obligation, maybe the NHL Network had this game, but it's a rematch of a Cup Final. That's like having Boston-Dallas, their first matchup when they play later this year, if that's on NBA TV. Bad job by the NHL. Come on, if you're trying to showcase and highlight your sport to the point where you want to have people, even in the dregs of the regular season, on a Monday in mid-December, and I get it, people are going to be focused in on the football, but if the NHL came out and said, hey guys, we have a rematch of the Cup Final tonight, if anybody's interested, Connor McDavid and company, 5-game winning streak, going up against the defending Cup champs, first time they're going to meet up, I'm sure there may be a good sports fan, not a casual or just a run-of-the-mill, but a good or even diehard sports fan may say, oh, you know what, let me keep in mind of this game or keep an eye on it to see, is it on ESPN, TNT? No, NHL Network. So you're welcome for those out there who are going to be interested, but just a terrible job by the NHL. And again, not knowing the ins and outs of the contracts, but those games need to be highlighted on your big networks. Terrible. Tomorrow, Islanders in Carolina, Devils in St. Louis, Washington and Chicago. I know Chicago's bad. And then Wednesday, what do you have here? Toronto at Dallas. That's a good game. Florida at Minnesota after their matchup in Edmonton. Vancouver at Utah. Those are your big games there to discuss NHL by the time we get to Thursday. So that's what you have there. Now, to wrap it all up, people, Major League Baseball, I got to get into that. We had a couple of big transactions there. And maybe I'll put to rest with the Juan Soto deal because he had his press conference there Thursday afternoon, which was, of course, after I recorded the podcast. And there's one takeaway that I have from that I want to share. But you had two big moves and two guys that are going to be free agents at the end of the year and two teams that said the hell with it. They're going to roll the dice and see how it's going to play out, whether or not they're going to be able to re-sign them. I think one team will be able to re-sign one. I don't know if the other will when it comes to the Cubs, and I'm going to start there. The Cubs acquired Kyle Tucker, the right fielder from the Houston Astros, for Isaac Paredes, the former third baseman from the Rays, where you're probably going to plug him in at third, where Alex Bregman, in all likelihood, is going to be gone. And they also get a pitcher, Hayden Wesneski, including an infield prospect, Cam Smith, not the golfer. So for the Cubs, they're going to go all in to see what Tucker could bring to the Windy City. Now, mind you, it's a little bit risky because if Tucker, who's a very good player and had injuries last year, which certainly stalled his season and didn't have the big season that he had in years prior, but with the big paydays that we've seen so far, more so to Soto, and not that he's going to get anywhere near that stratosphere, and I don't know who his agent is off the top of my head, but I'm sure Tucker, he's going to play this year out, bet on himself, have that big year knowing that he's going into a walk year, and then have to be forced to sign a deal, whether the Ricketts Company or Ricketts and Company, the ownership, present Tucker with a handsome deal that he may have to think long and hard to sign. But I would think Tucker is going to go the route of Aaron Judge to say, I'm going to base it on my play this year, and if I do put up big numbers and have a monster year, then he could go into free agency to get the offer from the highest bidder. The Cubs could still be in part of that, but instead of, let's say, offering $170 million, if he has a big year, he's going to probably get $250 million. So we'll have to wait and see on that. So I think that's going to be a scenario where the Cubs are rolling the dice unless they just blow Tucker away with an offer, but that we'll have to see here in the coming weeks and months leading into spring training. And as far as the Astros, I'm going to say this now, and I said this, and you can check those receipts on the bad side of J-Reels. When the Astros were 12-24, and as they were trying to get out of the muck early on in the season, I said, I don't think the Astros are going to make the playoffs. Sure enough, they proved me wrong. But now I think we could close the window, or we certainly started to close the window, and it may be sealed shut by the time we get to spring training, which will roughly be, think about this, people, 2 months from now. Because with Bregman on the brink of going elsewhere, and who knows where he may land, and now with Tucker is going to be playing right field in Wrigley, and there could be a scenario, Framber Valdez, who's going to be a free agent after next year, with the right package, he may be gone. Yes, you still have Altuve. Yes, you still have Yordan Alvarez, but this team now could be a shell of its old championship self. And yes, you still may have guys like Jeremy Pena, and you also still have Altuve, who's not going anywhere. He signed that extension. And a couple of other players that could still be part of that mix there. I mean, the Chas McCormicks of the world, I'm not going to get crazy over guys like that. But this could be it for the Astros. That's not to say they may not be in contention for a division or even a wild card for that matter. But as far as the core of that team, it is kaput. And I don't know. If Bregman comes back and if Framber Valdez is still there, I may have to put a question mark and think about that when we get to spring training. But if Bregman is gone and let's say if Valdez, he gets shipped elsewhere, I would have to say at that point, shut it. The Astros are going to be toast when it comes to their championship window of 7 straight ALCS appearances and 8 straight playoff appearances on top of that. And yes, but I understand the offseason is still in full swing. And a lot can still happen. You still have a ton of free agents that are out there, the Pete Alonsos, the Corbin Burns, Bregman, etc. So we'll see what's going to happen there. And then the Yankees acquired Devin Williams, the Brewer closer, where if you last recall, especially from yours truly and in these parts, gave up a game-winning 3-run homer to Pete Alonso in the 9th inning of a wild card do-or-die Game 3. So Williams, I thought this was a very shrewd move by the Bombers and Brian Cashman, because that bullpen, although it was very sound toward the back part of the season and even into the playoffs, but sprung leaks there a little bit, and now they have a guy who is a bona fide closer, one of the top handful in the sport. Now, for the Brewers, you can look at this twofold. A, they got rid of Devin Williams because to bring him back, who knows psychologically, a new year, one of the roughest, if not the roughest loss in Brewer history. So to bring him back, that may have been a tough proposition to have him come back, but we know the real answer was he's going into a walk year. He's going to be a free agent after next year, and with the climate as it is, if he has a big year similar to what he did this past year, he's going to command minimum 5 years, $80 million. And we all know that the Brewers aren't going to pony that up. So they figured, hey, let's make a trade. They get Nestor Cortez, serviceable pitcher. I'd say good pitcher. He's not very good. He's not great. I don't want to hear, oh, he was an all-star 2 years ago. Yes, he was. That's a fact. But to me, Cortez, he's a crafty pitcher. He is not a guy that's going to blow people away. He is not a guy that's going to be dominant. He's good. He's going to give you 5-6 innings. He's going to throw that nasty Nestor sidearm pitch. Yeah, there's a little panache to him. But other than that, the guy is a serviceable pitcher. That's it. And they also get Caleb Durbin, who is a diminutive, dare I even say, a Jose Altuve clone, 5'6", has a little pop in his bat, was a guy that, from what I've heard, that actually could have made the team, even as a starter, on the Yankee roster in 2025. So the Brewers at least get a prospect and a starting pitcher in the process. And also what I heard was that the Brewers have a lot of good young arms in the pipeline. Maybe they'll anoint Trevor McGill, the brother of Tyler McGill in the Mets, to be their closer. So that could be a guy that will shut down or lock down the 9th inning for the Brewers starting next year. But that was a shrewd move. And the Yankees, I think, if he has a big year, I don't know if they're going to be willing to sign him long-term now. Maybe sink for his supper, but they'll work out a deal throughout the course of the season. And I believe they don't discuss contracts in the middle of the year. But whether they sign him long-term now or they're going to have to roll the dice similar to what the Cubs are doing and have him have a big year and then maybe go off into free agency. So we'll see what's going to happen there. But I thought that was a very good move by the Yanks. And let's see if that's going to pay off big dividends, whether or not they sign him long-term or if he has that big season, the Yankees can, as you know, they'll offer him a ton of money and have him stay in pinstripes there, you would think, at least for the next half decade after this year. And then one other signing, which I thought was under the radar, but Brian De La Cruz, listen, I'm not trying to make him out to be a big player, but played for the Marlins, got traded to the Pirates there before the deadline. But the reason why I say this is going to be a big signing for the Braves, he's a young player, good bat. He doesn't have to do a lot in that lineup. In fact, the lineup will complement him as far as a guy that has pop, could play center field, He'll probably play a corner outfield position because Michael Harris, as you all know, is your center fielder. And I think this is more of an insurance policy because of Ronald Acuna Jr. tearing his ACL in the middle of the year. So therefore, at least you have Cruz in the lineup. I understand no Acuna, but you still have Austin Riley. You still have Matt Olson. You still have, give it up, Sean Murphy, who's a good stick. You also have Michael Harris, who's also a guy that has some pop and also has a good bat. So for De La Cruz to be inserted in the lineup, of course, Marcell Ozuna, throw him there in the mix too. So you would think De La Cruz is going to play right field. That's a guy that doesn't have to carry a lineup or doesn't have to do too much. He could just kind of blend in and, who knows, surprise some people with his stick. So that's a signing, especially in the NL East, is going to be big. Again, I'm not trying to make him out to be Roberto Clemente, but at the same time, that's a guy that if you're going to pay attention to the baseball landscape next year and you see that, oh, this guy's batting .320 with 9 home runs and it's the middle of May, well, now you know why. And then finally with Soto, I'll say this. The reason why he chose the Mets over the Yankees, and yes, I understand a little bit more money, which helps, et cetera, but the Mets threw a lot of that whole family vibe, family environment to Soto. And to me, I think that's what sold him more than anything, because that's what he said repeatedly throughout the press conference. And yes, even though he ghosted the Yankees, when he was asked in the press conference on, have you been in contact with any of your former teammates? And he said, no, I haven't spoken to any of them. And there were also reports based on what Michael Kay said, and I know I'm giving him a shout here, which I'm not a Michael Kay fan in the least, but he even said on his show that the future right fielder of the Mets had not only blocked his number, but also got a new phone number. So for whatever the reason, was he trying to phase out his career in New York with the Yankees to kind of start anew with a new number? And to me, I don't know, that's a little bit odd. It could be true. I'm not trying to say that that is erroneous by what Michael Kay stated, but even when you put all the pieces together, all right, maybe he just wanted to solely focus in on this process where he didn't exclude the Yankees. It was 4 or 5 teams that were in the mix because there were questions asked about the Yankee offer, and he says, oh, it wasn't just them. There were other teams that were involved, but the Mets, they were the ones that prevailed at the end of the day. And a lot of it, to me, based on what Soto said, was that whole family environment. What Steve Cohen said. He brought him out to his house out in Malibu or Beverly Hills, wherever it is, $32 million mansion. Yes, they did have meetings at certain locales after that, but it was a situation where Steve Cohen said, no, I'm going to invite you to the home. And it also helps that his wife, Alex, is a Latina, or Latinx, if you want to be politically correct, where I'm sure whatever it is that she said sold Soto, on top of him getting his suite in Citi Field, on top of the way his family was treated if you saw the press conference. And with the Yankees, and yes, they mentioned the ballpark, they mentioned Aaron Judge, they mentioned their history, they mentioned this, they mentioned that, but they did not mention the suite, they did not mention his family. Who knows with that episode with the security guard at Yankee Stadium, which that was also a story on whether or not they didn't treat him or his family well upon an experience there. I don't even know if that was early on in the year, middle of the year, during the postseason. Who knows? But the red carpet was rolled out, but the whole family angle was thrown at the feet of Juan Soto, and obviously it sold him. And that's how you look at it. Yes, $5 million more, even at 1 year less, was more than enough. But if it wasn't cemented by the family talk, then nothing else would be. So that's what you have there with the Soto situation. As we could put a rest of that. Really, we've been talking about that for the past week. And that'll do it, my good people. Another episode in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review on all available platforms, whether it be Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel, at JReels. Please go there, subscribe, like, leave a comment, share with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, with the big-time sports fan, the kook of a sports fan in your life, even the casual, or just the average sports fan that just is interested in sports talk. Please send it to them. Take a screenshot. Send it to me on my socials. I'll be more than happy to repost that. And speaking of which, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, the JReelsPodcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is it, people. This is what I love to do. 10 months strong since I took the leap from corporate America to do what it is that I love, my passion, to blaze and carve a path, a trail in this industry, to earn an income, which hasn't happened yet. And I know that may sound a little thirsty right now, but guess what? When you're 10 months in doing this, and yes, I know I have a lot of work ahead and a lot of work right now, even right in front of me, but still, your participation in trying to get the word out to those people who are into sports, and not only that, even with the content on my YouTube channel at JReels, which I do have lifestyle content, so it's not just 100% all about sports. And I'm going to have some more lifestyle content to come as we close out 2024 and into 2025. Some inspiration, some motivation, some rallying the troops to get on board to where we want to go in life, to what angles, what direction, or even where we want to go as far as living this thing that we call life. So all that encompassing, people, please go on all those platforms. And one more time, this is what I love to do. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports from birth, sharing my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings with nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury, with everything that's happening. On the ice, diamond, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels podcast, on the flip, baby.